Evelyn Turner sat alone in the cold, dimly lit garage, her 68th birthday marking a day she could have never imagined. The scent of motor oil and dust hung thick in the air, and the flickering beam from her flashlight cut through the darkness. She leaned against the rusted wall, her body tired and aching, but her mind was in a storm of confusion. Austin's words from earlier that day echoed relentlessly in her head. "You're just a useless old woman, Mom. What would you even do with a real inheritance?" Dad knew that. The words stung. They didn't sound like the son she had raised. Her eyes blurred with tears, but she didn't wipe them away. There was no point. Not anymore. Everything she had known had shattered in the blink of an eye. The door to the garage had groaned in protest when she finally managed to unlock it. But the sight that greeted her when the door swung open sent a shiver down her spine. This couldn't be the inheritance Dylan had left her. A garage tucked away on Industrial Parkway. What was she supposed to do with this? But as she stepped inside, the reality of the situation set in. She had driven aimlessly for hours after leaving the law office, the bitterness of the reading still fresh in her mind. She could still hear Mr. Fletcher's words as he read Dylan's will. "To my son, Austin Turner, I leave our penthouse residence in Los Angeles and my primary investment portfolio. A simple, straightforward inheritance." Austin, the golden child, had everything. Dylan had always favored him. Her husband's love for their son had never been in question. Austin had always been the one who got the best of everything, the one who could do no wrong in Dylan's eyes. "And to my beloved wife, Evelyn Turner, I leave the property located at 1420 Industrial Parkway. The garage and its contents. A garage. A laughable, insulting afterthought. Dylan's last gift to her was something she could barely comprehend. How could he, in all his wisdom, leave her with this? Evelyn's hands trembled as she leaned against the wall. It felt as if she had been crushed beneath the weight of the world. Was this what he thought of her after 42 years of marriage? That she was only worth a garage? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps behind her. She shook her head and refocused. No. She had come here to understand what had been left to her, to understand what was hidden within this seemingly insignificant building. With a sense of dread building in her chest, she walked to the center of the room and turned her flashlight toward the shadows. The old wooden beams creaked above her as she explored the space, her heart racing with each step. The garage was filled with more than just old tools and junk. It was as though the garage had been prepared in some way, carefully curated, not just abandoned. And then she saw it. The gleam of silver caught her eye, drawing her closer. Evelyn's breath hitched as she moved toward the object partially shrouded beneath a dusted cloth. Her flashlight illuminated it. A vintage Aston Martin, its polished silver grille gleaming under the weak light. It was breathtaking. But why? Why had Dylan kept such a treasure hidden away from her? Why had he never told her about it? Her fingers trembled as she pulled away the cloth, revealing a 1964 DB5 in pristine silver birch. The car was flawless, a perfect replica of the one Dylan had always admired in the James Bond films. She could hardly breathe as she stepped back, her mind struggling to comprehend the reality before her. This was no ordinary garage. No, this was a shrine, a treasure trove of vintage cars, each worth more than anything she could have imagined. It wasn't just a garage. It was an automotive sanctuary, a place that had been carefully constructed to hold these valuable cars. Her flashlight revealed more, another covered car. A 1956 Mercedes-Benz 300 SL Gullwing. The sleek design, the deep blue paint, the gleaming chrome. It was another prize, another piece of history. And yet another cover revealed a 1967 Ferrari 275 GTB4, its rich red exterior shining as if it had just rolled off the factory floor. How could Dylan have kept this a secret from her all these years? How could he have concealed such a vast fortune in vehicles without a word? Each car was accompanied by a leather portfolio containing documents, maintenance records, and purchase agreements. These weren't just cars. They were museum-quality treasures, valued at millions of dollars. Evelyn couldn't make sense of it. She stepped back, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she had found. The will had been clear. The penthouse, the investments, they were all Austin's. But this was hers. The realization washed over her slowly like a cold wave. Dylan had left her more than just a garage. He had left her security. An entirely different kind of inheritance, one that would change everything. She walked to the wall and noticed an envelope taped beside the light switch. Her name was scrawled across it in Dylan's familiar handwriting. A letter. With shaking hands, Evelyn pulled it down and broke the seal. Dearest Evelyn, if you're reading this, then I'm gone. And you've discovered what I've come to think of as my final gift to you. Her heart raced as she read, her mind still reeling from the shock. Dylan's words flooded her senses, explaining everything. The cars, the estate, the wealth hidden away for her. Dylan had been planning for this moment, preparing her for a future she never could have imagined. And as she sat there, surrounded by priceless treasures, Evelyn finally understood. Dylan had known. He had anticipated everything, the cruelty of Austin's actions, his disregard for her, and he had left this for her. Not just a garage, but a gift of true wealth and independence. This was no ordinary inheritance. This was Dylan's final act of love and foresight. Evelyn's mind was a whirl of emotions, but one thing was certain. This was only the beginning. Evelyn Turner stood in the doorway of the penthouse, staring at the luxurious space she had once shared with Dylan. The same penthouse where they had laughed, loved, and built a life together. Now it felt like a hollow shell, stripped of warmth and filled with the cold sting of betrayal. Austin Turner, her only son, stood by the door with a look of indifference on his face, his hands stuffed into the pockets of his tailored suit. His eyes, usually so full of promise, were now distant and calculating. There was no trace of the loving son she had raised. He looked at her, not with concern, but with an almost clinical detachment, as though she were nothing more than a burden to be dealt with. "You need to leave, Mom." Austin's voice was flat, devoid of emotion. He gave her a once-over, his gaze lingering briefly on the suitcase by her feet. "The place is mine now." Dad made that clear. Evelyn's heart dropped. She had expected many things in her life, but not this. "Not from him? What do you mean?" Her voice was small, barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly would make this nightmare even more real. "The penthouse is mine, Austin." "It's in Dylan's will," Austin scoffed. "The penthouse? The portfolio? It's all mine now, Mom. Don't you get it?" His voice carried a hint of impatience, as if explaining something to a child. "The will's been read, and everything's in my name. You don't belong here anymore. I've already got plans for this place." His words stung like a slap, and Evelyn felt the weight of them pressing against her chest. She had always thought she would grow old in this place, surrounded by memories of Dylan, with Austin by her side. But instead, Austin's face twisted with greed and ambition, a side of him she had never known existed. "I've got colleagues coming over tomorrow to discuss turning Dad's study into a home office." "I need the space, Mom," Austin continued, his voice colder now. "You could stay with Aunt Helen for a while, or—" He chuckled, but the sound had no warmth. "There's always that garage Dad left you. You can make yourself useful there. A garage." The word hit Evelyn like a physical blow. She had never thought her son could be so callous, so dismissive of everything Dylan had worked for, everything she had worked for. She wanted to scream, to lash out at him, to tell him he was wrong. But the words caught in her throat. "Why would you treat me like this?" she asked quietly, unable to hide the tremor in her voice. "After everything, Austin, this is how you repay me? You can't even be bothered to care for me now?" Austin's expression hardened, and he stepped closer, putting his hand on her shoulder. The touch felt wrong, too firm, too cold. "It's not personal, Mom," he said, his voice flat. "It's just business. You'll figure it out. You always do." Evelyn recoiled slightly from his touch, as if it had burned her. She had raised him, loved him, and this was how he saw her now, an inconvenience. Something to be discarded when it was no longer useful. "I need time to figure this out." "Austin," she whispered, her voice cracking as the tears she had been holding back finally started to fall. She couldn't understand how it had come to this. How had her son become a stranger? Austin didn't respond. He simply shrugged as though it didn't matter. "I don't have time for this, Mom. I've got things to do. I'll have the doorman help you with your bags." With that, he turned and walked out of the room, leaving Evelyn standing alone in the penthouse, feeling more lost than ever before. The apartment that had once been her sanctuary now felt like a cage, a reminder of all she had lost. She stood there for what felt like an eternity, the silence around her deafening. The tears flowed freely now, but they did little to ease the pain gnawing at her chest. How had things changed so completely, so quickly? With a trembling hand, Evelyn picked up her suitcase and walked out of the penthouse, her heart heavy with the realization that she no longer had a home. As she stepped into the elevator, the weight of the world pressed down on her. She had no place to go, no one to turn to. She was alone, abandoned by her son, and in the midst of her grief, she realized that she had nowhere to return to except the garage Dylan had left her. The thought of the garage filled her with confusion and dread. How could this be what Dylan had planned for her? How could he have thought this was enough? But as she drove through the unfamiliar streets, headed toward Industrial Parkway, Evelyn's mind began to shift. This garage, this strange inheritance, was the only thing she had left. And if it was all Dylan had left her, she would have to make sense of it. When she arrived, the sight of the dilapidated building felt like a punch to the gut. The garage was nothing like the penthouse, nothing like the life she had imagined. But it was all she had now. As she stood before the rusty door, key trembling in her hand, Evelyn's thoughts turned inward. She had always believed that Austin would be the one to take care of her in her later years, just as Dylan had taken care of them both. But now she was facing the harsh reality that her son had changed, and not for the better. Austin's cruelty had forced Evelyn to confront her own strength. For the first time in years, she wasn't just a mother or a wife, she was alone, with no one to depend on but herself. And though the pain of betrayal stung deep in her heart, Evelyn knew she had to find a way to move forward, to rebuild her life from the ashes of what had been. The garage was just the beginning. The beginning of something she didn't yet understand, but knew she would have to face head-on. The creaking of the old garage door was barely audible as Evelyn Turner stepped inside, her heart still heavy with the weight of what had just transpired. Austin's cruel words echoed in her mind, but as she crossed the threshold, a strange quietness enveloped her. It was an emptiness that only seemed to amplify the sound of her footsteps on the concrete floor, each step carrying her deeper into the unknown. The garage wasn't what she had expected. When Dylan had left it to her in his will, she had imagined a cluttered, dusty space filled with forgotten tools, old furniture, and years of accumulated junk. Instead, the garage was far more than that. It was a sanctuary, carefully curated, like a treasure trove that had been hidden away for decades. Her flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating what she could barely believe. The dim light revealed a collection of vintage cars, each one draped in dusted cloths that clung tightly to their curves. There was no mistaking the meticulous care that had gone into preserving these machines. Whoever had stored them here had gone to great lengths to ensure their safety, their value. The floor beneath her feet, though worn, was spotless, and the air smelled faintly of leather and oil, a strangely comforting scent. As Evelyn's eyes adjusted to the low light, she slowly moved toward the first covered car. Her breath caught in her throat as her fingers brushed against the cloth. The fabric felt soft to the touch, yet there was a tension beneath it, as though it was hiding something precious, something important. With a trembling hand, she pulled back the cloth. The gleam of silver took her breath away. Beneath the cover was a vintage Aston Martin, its polished silver grille gleaming under the flashlight's beam. Evelyn's heart skipped a beat as she recognized the unmistakable shape of a 1964 DB5. She had seen this model before, in old movies, in books about automotive history, but never in real life. She couldn't understand it. Dylan had never shown any interest in cars like these. Why would he keep such a rare, expensive treasure hidden away in a garage? Had he been a collector all along? Evelyn took a step back, feeling dizzy. She had always known Dylan had secrets, but this? This was more than she had ever imagined. She moved to the next car, her curiosity piqued despite her growing confusion. The second cloth cover, though equally well kept, seemed to conceal a different kind of treasure. Evelyn's fingers trembled as she slowly removed the cover, revealing a 1956 Mercedes-Benz 300 SL Gullwing. Its deep blue paint gleamed under the flashlight, the chrome details catching the light like stars in a dark sky. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat as she admired the graceful curves of the car, its unique gull-wing doors still intact. The kind of car only found in the pages of high-end car magazines or exclusive auctions. How could Dylan have kept all of this from her? It didn't make sense. He had never mentioned a passion for vintage cars, never even hinted at such an obsession. She had always thought of Dylan as a practical man, focused on their family, their home. Cars had never been a part of their life, or so she had believed. And then there was the third car. It was covered in the same pristine cloth, its shape hinting at yet another remarkable machine. With growing disbelief, Evelyn moved to the final cover and pulled it back. A Ferrari 275 GTB4, its brilliant red exterior practically glowing under the light, stood before her, its sleek lines and aggressive stance exuding power and elegance. Evelyn was struck by how much it reminded her of the rich, intense red wine Dylan had always ordered on their anniversaries. She stood there for a long moment, speechless, her eyes darting between the three cars. Her mind was racing. She didn't understand. Why had Dylan kept these cars from her? Why had he hidden them away like this without a word? These weren't just cars. They were works of art, each one worth a fortune, and yet Dylan had left them in a garage. It was impossible to make sense of it. As she stood there, still processing the overwhelming sight before her, something caught her eye. On a small stand next to the Ferrari, there was a leather portfolio neatly arranged next to the car. Evelyn's curiosity got the better of her, and she reached for it. Feeling the weight of the document in her hands, she opened it carefully, revealing maintenance records, provenance papers, and purchase agreements. This was real. Dylan had invested in these cars with the same precision he had applied to everything else in their life. But why? Why had he kept them secret? And why had he left them to her? Her thoughts were interrupted by something else. On the far wall, near the light switch, was an envelope, its yellowed edges and familiar handwriting immediately recognizable. It was addressed to her in Dylan's unmistakable script. Evelyn's heart skipped a beat as she reached for it, her hands shaking. The letter, sealed with care, was heavy in her palm. She tore it open slowly, desperate to understand what Dylan had left for her, and why he had kept these treasures hidden. The moment her eyes fell on the first line of Dylan's letter, her world began to shift. Dearest Evelyn, if you're reading this, then I'm gone. And you've discovered what I've come to think of as my final gift to you. The words hit Evelyn with the force of 1,000 unspoken thoughts. This was it. The explanation. Dylan had been planning for this moment, this revelation, all along. As she continued to read, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Dylan explained everything. His secret illness, his limited time, and his fear for Evelyn's future. He had known that Austin's ambition would eventually come to the surface and that he could not leave everything to their son. The penthouse, the investment portfolio, they were all Austin's. But the cars, the hidden assets, they were Evelyn's. Dylan had left them to her, knowing they were not just financial investments, but a means to secure her independence, her future. As Evelyn read on, the gravity of Dylan's foresight settled in. This garage, these cars, the wealth hidden away in the shadows, had all been carefully designed to give her everything she would need to live the rest of her life with freedom and security. The confusion, the betrayal, everything that had clouded her mind since Austin's harsh words began to dissolve. Dylan had seen it all coming. He had anticipated everything, from the cruelty of Austin's behavior to the betrayal she would feel. And now, Evelyn understood. Dylan's final act had not been one of abandonment, but of love. A love so deep that he had gone to extraordinary lengths to protect her. As she sat on the leather bench in the garage, surrounded by these treasures, Evelyn finally allowed herself to breathe. She didn't have all the answers yet, but Dylan had given her a map. A map that would lead her to a future she had never imagined. A future where she could finally step out from under the weight of her son's expectations and claim her own path. The garage was just the beginning. Evelyn sat in the dimly lit garage, the weight of the letter in her hands pressing down on her chest like an anchor. Dylan's familiar handwriting stared back at her, the ink slightly faded from age, but unmistakably his. She had not expected this, an envelope hidden behind the light switch, left for her to find only after his passing. Her fingers trembled as she carefully unfolded the pages, the rustling of the paper louder than anything else in the garage. She braced herself as she began to read, her mind already swimming with the implications of what she had discovered in the garage. The cars, the hidden wealth, she could hardly begin to process it. But Dylan's words began to unravel everything she thought she knew about their life together. "Dearest Evelyn," the letter began, "if you're reading this, then I'm gone. And you've discovered what I've come to think of as my final gift to you." The simple words hit Evelyn harder than she had anticipated. She had always known Dylan was practical, methodical, but never in a million years had she imagined him planning every detail of her future without her knowing. And yet here she was, sitting in the very garage that, until today, had felt like the ultimate betrayal. And now it was becoming clear that it was anything but. Dylan's words continued. 6 years ago, I was diagnosed with progressive heart failure. The doctors gave me 5 years at best. I've beaten their timeline by a year, but I know I don't have much longer. The truth is, I've been planning for this moment for some time, and I couldn't risk leaving you in the dark. Evelyn's breath hitched in her throat. Dylan's heart failure had been a secret to her, something she hadn't known about until his death. He had always been the strong, silent type, rarely sharing his fears or vulnerabilities with anyone, least of all her. She had always thought of him as invincible, but now, reading his words, she understood how much he had been hiding, not just his illness, but his fear for what would happen to her when he was gone. "I know you'll be confused, Evelyn," the letter continued, "and I'm sorry for the shock, but this secrecy wasn't meant to hurt you. It was meant to protect you." Evelyn's heart ached as she read on. Dylan had feared for her future, and with good reason. He had watched their son Austin change over the years, watched him become more ambitious, more ruthless, and less the son they had raised him to be. Dylan had seen the shift long before she had, and it seemed that his suspicions about Austin had only deepened as time passed. "Austin," Dylan wrote, "has become a man I no longer recognize. The boy we raised, with all his potential and warmth, is gone, replaced by someone I fear will use his inheritance to control you and everything else. I can't allow that. I can't risk leaving you vulnerable to him." Evelyn felt a pang of guilt as she read those words. She had never wanted to believe that Austin could become someone so selfish, someone so cold. But now, with Dylan's words echoing in her mind, she realized that perhaps Dylan had seen something she had missed. Had she been blind to the subtle signs of Austin's changing nature? Had she made excuses for him all these years, not wanting to see the truth? Dylan's letter continued, describing his decision to leave Austin the visible wealth that everyone would recognize. The penthouse, the investment portfolio, the assets that would solidify his status. But the true wealth, the real security, Dylan had left to Evelyn. It was a gift, not just of money, but of independence, of freedom from Austin's control. "The cars, the properties, and the investments," Dylan wrote, "are yours. These cars alone are worth over $12 million. The paperwork is in the safe, along with detailed instructions on how to manage the assets. I've ensured that you'll have income for the rest of your life, and that you'll never have to depend on anyone, not even Austin." Evelyn felt a strange numbness settle over her. $12 million, cars, properties, investments. It was impossible to absorb the weight of Dylan's plan all at once. Her eyes darted over the letter again, rereading the numbers, the assets, the precision with which Dylan had set everything in motion. This was more than she had ever dreamed of. She had never wanted for anything in her marriage to Dylan, but this was more than just financial security. This was Dylan's love for her, his foresight, his protection. It was the last thing he could give her, and it was as meticulous and careful as everything else he had ever done. "I know this will be overwhelming, Evelyn," Dylan wrote, "but I've done this because I love you. You've always been the heart of our family, and I want you to have the opportunity to live the rest of your life on your own terms. I don't want you to have to answer to anyone, especially not Austin. You deserve better." Evelyn's vision blurred with tears as she continued reading, the depth of Dylan's love and care washing over her in waves. He had known everything. He had seen the future. He had known that Austin's greed would eventually overtake him and that she would be left to face it alone. Dylan had planned for that. He had made sure that no matter what, Evelyn would be secure, independent, and able to live her life without relying on anyone's charity. "I'm sorry I kept this from you, Evelyn. I wanted to protect you, to give you the time and space to grieve before you had to face this. But now that you've found the garage, the cars, and the documents, I trust you to make your own decisions. Take your time. There's no rush." Evelyn placed the letter down on the bench beside her, her hands shaking as she took a deep breath. Dylan's plan was both a gift and a burden. She had always thought of their life together as a partnership. But now she saw that Dylan had been preparing for the day she would have to stand alone. She had never imagined she would be the one to take control of their legacy, to manage millions of dollars in assets, to face Austin's betrayal head-on. But here she was. Dylan had given her everything he could, and now it was up to her to honor his final wishes. Evelyn wiped the tears from her eyes and took a deep, steadying breath. She wasn't sure what the future held, but one thing was clear. Dylan had left her with the tools to rebuild, to stand on her own. And for the first time in a long while, she felt a spark of hope. Dylan had loved her, had trusted her, and now, it was her turn to trust herself. The world had shifted beneath her feet. But Evelyn Turner was not about to fall. Evelyn stood in the center of the garage, still holding Dylan's letter in her trembling hands, the weight of his final words pressing heavily on her heart. The revelation of the cars, the wealth, and the security Dylan had planned for her was overwhelming. Her thoughts swirled, each one competing for attention as she tried to absorb the magnitude of what she had just discovered. But amidst the polished chrome and the carefully stored treasures, there was still more to find. The letter had mentioned a safe, a secure place where all the final documents and banking information were kept. Evelyn's eyes swept across the garage, her gaze settling on a framed photograph of Dylan and her taken on a trip to Venice. The photograph seemed out of place in this space filled with metal and machinery, but it held a clue. A small, discreet safe was hidden behind it. With the photograph carefully moved aside, Evelyn's fingers hovered over the smooth surface of the safe. Her heart thudded in her chest as she worked the combination, a familiar one. Their wedding anniversary. Dylan had always been sentimental, even practical in his love. It was a combination they had shared for years, an unspoken bond now revealed to be far more significant than she had ever known. The safe clicked open, and Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. Inside, neatly arranged, were several folders, each labeled with a name that felt too foreign to be real. Properties, banking, investments. She had always known Dylan had a mind for planning, but this level of foresight was something she hadn't anticipated. She carefully removed the first folder and opened it, her eyes scanning the contents with disbelief. The first page was a detailed list of real estate holdings, commercial properties, apartment complexes and private estates scattered across the country. Her fingers trembled as she turned the page, uncovering more than she had ever imagined. A small vineyard in Northern California, a luxury condo in Chicago, a beachfront property in Seattle. The list was endless, but the total value at the bottom made her dizzy. Over $50 million in real estate assets alone. Evelyn sat down heavily on the nearby bench, her legs suddenly too weak to support her. This wasn't just a few well-placed investments. Dylan had spent years, decades, building an empire she had never known existed. The staggering sums, the precision of the investments. He had carefully crafted a future for her, one that went beyond the cars, beyond the garage. Dylan had ensured that she would be protected in every way imaginable. She turned the page to the next folder. Inside were documents from various banking institutions, detailing accounts in her name, accounts she had never known about. There were trust funds, dividend statements, bonds, and a large sum of liquid assets earmarked for her immediate use. Evelyn felt the full weight of what Dylan had done. He had given her not just a physical inheritance, but a financial cushion so vast. She could never have imagined it. The shock was so profound, Evelyn's head spun. She had always assumed they had lived comfortably, but this was wealth that could secure her future for generations. She thought back to the penthouse, the cruel words Austin had spoken. How he had tried to dismiss her, how he had discarded her like something no longer valuable. And yet, here she was, holding a future that Dylan had painstakingly created, one that would allow her to live in peace, in comfort, and most importantly, in independence. Tears filled her eyes, but these were not the tears of pain or betrayal she had shed earlier. These were tears of awe and gratitude for Dylan's foresight. He had seen this coming. He had known what would happen after his death. He had known Austin's ambition would overtake him and that Evelyn would be left to fend for herself. So Dylan had prepared her. He had given her the means to stand on her own. Her fingers brushed over the papers, the weight of the documents slowly sinking in. She had spent so much of her life depending on Dylan, on the family they had built together. But now she was going to have to make her own way. Dylan had given her the tools, but the responsibility was hers to carry. Evelyn closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath as she allowed the gravity of it all to settle within her. She felt a deep pang of loss for Dylan, for the life they had shared, but also a spark of something else, something unfamiliar: freedom. Dylan had not just left her an inheritance. He had left her the power to choose, to make her own decisions, to take control of her life in a way she never had before. It was daunting, overwhelming, but it was also exhilarating. For the first time in years, Evelyn felt the stirring of something within her, a sense of agency she hadn't known she was missing. As she flipped through the remaining folders, her mind started to shift from disbelief to acceptance. Dylan had taken such careful steps to ensure she wouldn't have to depend on anyone, especially not Austin. And while the idea of moving forward without Dylan by her side felt like an insurmountable challenge, she knew that he had done everything he could to make sure she wouldn't be alone. The world she had known was gone. Austin, the penthouse, their old life, but this new life, with all its possibilities, was waiting for her. She wasn't sure where to begin, but she knew she had to start somewhere. The thought of facing Austin again, of dealing with the mess he had left behind, was intimidating. But Evelyn knew she could no longer allow herself to be intimidated. Dylan had left her everything she needed. Now, it was up to her to find her path forward. She spent the next hour carefully organizing the documents in the safe, making sure everything was in its place. There was still so much to process, so many decisions to be made. But for the first time since Dylan's death, Evelyn felt like she was beginning to see a way forward. The first step, she realized, was to take control, to start making decisions for herself, and to begin building a future she could call her own. Evelyn stood up, her knees slightly unsteady, but her resolve firming with each passing second. She knew the road ahead would be difficult, that there would be many challenges, but she also knew she wasn't alone. Dylan's love, his foresight, had given her the foundation to rebuild. She took one final glance at the safe, her mind already shifting toward the next steps. Evelyn Turner was no longer just a wife, no longer just a mother. She was a woman with a future of her own, and for the first time in years, that future was filled with possibilities. Evelyn sat at the worn leather desk in the garage office, the papers from the safe neatly arranged in front of her. She couldn't help but stare at the financial documents that had been laid out in front of her, their implications still sinking in. Dylan had left her not only the luxury of wealth, but the means to live independently. It felt like a distant dream, one that she had never imagined for herself. Yet here it was, laid bare before her. She felt a strange mixture of disbelief and awe as she realized the extent of what her late husband had done for her. Dylan had not just left her a physical inheritance of cars and properties. He had provided her with the tools to take charge of her own destiny, something she had never expected or asked for. As her mind whirred with the enormity of it all, she felt a deep sense of loss for Dylan. He had always been the planner, the provider, the one who had cared for their family in ways she could never fully appreciate until now. Yet even in death, He had managed to protect her, but there was still much Evelyn needed to understand. Dylan had kept so many secrets, things she had never known, things that had now become her responsibility. She needed guidance, someone who could help her navigate the intricacies of the wealth Dylan had left behind. Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached for her phone, dialing the number Dylan had included in his letter, Carson Webb. The name had been familiar, mentioned in passing in the documents. Dylan's trusted advisor, the one who had helped him acquire the cars and manage the investments. It rang twice before the line clicked. "Mrs. Turner," came the calm, composed voice on the other end. "It's a pleasure to hear from you. How are you holding up?" Evelyn paused, unsure of how to answer. She hadn't expected the warmth in Carson's voice, and it made her feel a little more at ease. "I'm getting by," she said softly. "I've just discovered everything Dylan left me. The cars, the properties. I'm trying to process it all." Carson's tone was reassuring. "I understand. It's a lot to take in. Dylan was always a meticulous planner, and he worked hard to ensure you would be well taken care of after his passing. But if you need any clarification or help understanding the assets, I'm here for you." Evelyn felt a deep breath of relief. Someone who could help. She wasn't alone in this after all. "Thank you, Carson. I don't even know where to begin. Dylan left me a safe with more than I ever imagined. Real estate, investments, all sorts of accounts. I just need to understand the value of it all and what steps I should take next." There was a pause on the line before Carson responded. "First, let me confirm the authenticity of what you've discovered. The properties listed in the documents are legitimate. They are all secured through various trusts, and Dylan had them evaluated regularly. The total value of the cars alone is approximately $12 million as mentioned in the letter. The real estate holdings, as well as the liquid assets, will provide you with a steady income, as well as the flexibility to make decisions without worry." Evelyn listened, her mind spinning. She had assumed the cars would be valuable, but hearing the full extent of the wealth that Dylan had created for her, it felt like a dream. She pressed the phone to her ear, her voice almost a whisper. "And the banking accounts? The stocks and bonds?" "All secure," Carson answered smoothly. Dylan worked with a team of financial advisors, and all the accounts were set up with specific beneficiaries, namely you. Your inheritance is divided into trusts that are set to provide you with a steady income. There's no rush to make any decisions, but you will need to work with an attorney to finalize the structure of the trusts. Evelyn leaned back in her chair, trying to absorb the information. The complexity of it all seemed daunting, but the certainty in Carson's voice gave her a sense of peace. Dylan had thought of everything. He had given her everything she needed to move forward, to rebuild her life without depending on anyone, not even Austin. "Thank you, Carson," she said, her voice steadier now. "This is more than I ever imagined. Dylan truly prepared for everything, but I have so many questions. How do I start? What should I do first?" Carson's tone softened. "I recommend you start by getting settled. Take your time. If you'd like, I can help you connect with a financial advisor who can walk you through the process of managing the assets. But the most important thing right now is for you to feel secure. This wealth isn't just about money. It's about ensuring you have the independence you need, both financially and emotionally." Evelyn nodded, even though Carson couldn't see her. He was right. For the first time in what felt like forever, Evelyn was beginning to realize that she had choices. She didn't have to rely on Austin or anyone else. She could finally live life on her terms. "I'll think about it," she said quietly. "And, Carson, thank you for being here. I'm not sure I would have understood everything without your help." "It's my pleasure, Mrs. Turner. If you need anything else, don't hesitate to call. I'll check in with you in a few days, but take it one step at a time." Evelyn hung up the phone, feeling an odd sense of calm wash over her. The weight of Dylan's death was still heavy on her heart, but for the first time, she could see a path forward. There were still difficult decisions ahead, especially with Austin, but she had a sense of direction now. She wasn't going to be swept along by circumstances. She had been given the chance to start again. And this time, it would be on her own terms. Evelyn glanced at the stacks of paperwork, the financial documents Dylan had left her, and the wealth that now rested in her hands. She could feel the beginning of a new chapter unfolding in front of her. But first, she needed to get settled. She needed a home, not just a place to stay, but a place where she could finally feel at peace with herself. A sanctuary where she could start over. Her gaze shifted to the documents detailing the cottage Dylan had purchased for her in Carmel. It had always been a dream of theirs, a small coastal home to retire to. Dylan had made it a reality for her, and now it was time to see it for herself. With a final, steadying breath, Evelyn made her decision. She would visit the cottage, and from there, she would start making plans. Not just for herself, but for her future, one where she could live independently, without the constraints of Austin's expectations or her own fears. The road ahead would be challenging, especially with Austin still in the picture, but Evelyn was ready. She was ready to take the first step toward her new life. Evelyn Turner sat in the cozy study of the Carmel cottage, the soft murmur of the ocean waves in the distance providing an unusual sense of calm. She hadn't expected to find peace so quickly, but something about the quiet solitude, the soft furnishings, and the gentle rhythm of the waves had settled her mind. Still, her heart was heavy, and she knew that sooner or later she would have to confront the son who had cast her aside without a second thought. Her phone buzzed suddenly, breaking the silence. Evelyn's stomach twisted when she saw the caller ID. Austin. It had been a few days since their last confrontation, since he had coldly dismissed her, but she hadn't expected him to reach out so soon. His call had been inevitable, but it still made her uneasy. With a sigh, she set the notebook down and walked over to the window. Outside, the evening light was fading, and the last of the day's warmth lingered in the air. The world outside was still, peaceful even, and Evelyn let her gaze drift toward the horizon. She hadn't allowed herself the luxury of peace in so long. She had been too focused on keeping up with everything, keeping up with Austin's expectations, with the life she thought she was supposed to live. But now, in this office, in this quiet space, she was beginning to understand something. She didn't have to keep up with anything anymore. For the first time in days, Evelyn allowed herself a deep breath, letting go of the anxiety, the guilt, the worry that had been building since Dylan's death. She was here, she was safe, and Dylan had made sure that she would never have to depend on anyone else again. The night stretched on quietly as Evelyn unpacked a small suitcase she had brought with her from the penthouse. She carefully arranged the clothes in the small closet, placing the personal items on a shelf, each action a small but meaningful step toward making this space feel like her own. The silence was comforting, but it was also a reminder of what she had lost. Dylan, the life she had known, the home she had shared with her son. As the night deepened and the world outside quieted, Evelyn sat on the leather armchair, her hands folded in her lap. The weight of her situation, of the conflict with Austin and the challenge of starting over, was still there. But it no longer felt like an insurmountable burden. It was a part of the process, a part of her journey to reclaim her life. She thought back to the conversation with Austin, to his words that had cut her so deeply. He hadn't once asked if she was okay, if she needed help. He had only seen her as an obstacle, as a problem to be solved. But what Austin didn't understand was that she was no longer the same woman he had known. She wasn't the woman who had taken his cruelty in silence. She wasn't the woman who had silently accepted whatever came her way. Evelyn had learned something in the past few days, something she hadn't fully understood until now. She had power. Dylan had made sure of that. And now it was time for her to use it, to face Austin and take control of her future, just as Dylan had always wanted her to. Her thoughts solidified into determination as she stood up from the chair and walked to the window, gazing out at the darkened sky. She had her life to rebuild, and she was ready to do it. Tomorrow she would face Austin again, on her own terms. But tonight she allowed herself the space to breathe, to gather her strength. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Evelyn Turner was not going to let anyone, especially her son, decide what that future would be. She would decide. Evelyn Turner stood at the door of the penthouse, her hand on the handle, hesitating for just a moment. The familiar luxury of the building, the sweeping views of the city below, and the memories of her life with Dylan seemed so distant now. The life she had shared with him felt like it belonged to someone else, someone who wasn't standing outside this door, ready to face the man who had once been her son. Austin had insisted that she come, his voice dripping with impatience and coldness. The penthouse had been his now, but Evelyn still couldn't shake the feeling that it had always been more hers than he realized. This was where she and Dylan had built their life, their home. The walls echoed with the laughter of their earlier years, with the quiet moments spent together on the couch, watching movies or sipping wine on the balcony. But those memories seemed so far away now. Taking a deep breath, Evelyn stepped inside. The door clicked shut behind her, and she was immediately struck by the emptiness. The penthouse, once full of life, was now nothing more than a sterile, impersonal space, void of the warmth and love that had once filled it. Boxes and plastic sheeting covered what was once their shared home, the renovations already in full swing. The grand living room, which had once been filled with the scent of Dylan's cologne and the soft murmur of conversation, now felt like a museum, cold and devoid of life, and there, in the middle of it all, was Austin. His back was turned to her as he stood near the window, his gaze focused on something outside, his posture stiff. The faintest hint of frustration seemed to radiate from him, and when he turned to acknowledge her, his expression was one of indifference. "Finally," Austin said, his voice clipped. "I wasn't sure if you were actually going to show up or not." "It's not like there's much left to take," Evelyn swallowed her response. She had known this moment would be difficult, but seeing Austin's dismissive attitude, his complete lack of concern for her, for their shared history, was still a punch to the gut. She had expected coldness, but this was something different. It wasn't just indifference. It was a complete disavowal of everything they had once shared. "Is everything packed?" she asked, her voice surprisingly steady, though she could feel the sting of tears threatening to rise. She focused on the task at hand, pushing her emotions aside for the moment. Austin shrugged, his eyes scanning the room with a detachment that stung. "Everything that matters is already gone. I've taken care of the rest. You can go through the boxes if you want, but I'm not sticking around for that. You know the drill." Evelyn nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She turned away from Austin, trying to center herself, trying to find a moment of peace in the chaos. She moved toward the boxes, her fingers brushing against the edges of the cardboard, the remnants of their life together now reduced to possessions she would have to sift through like some stranger. She bent down to open the first box, her hands shaking ever so slightly as she lifted the flaps. Inside, she found a mix of old clothes and keepsakes, nothing of real importance, nothing that had any deep meaning to her, just the remnants of a life she no longer recognized. But then, beneath the clutter, her fingers brushed against something familiar, something that made her heart stop. It was Dylan's old leather messenger bag, the one he had carried with him for years. She had always loved the worn, soft texture of the leather, the way it had molded to his shape. She had always found it so comforting, so him. Tears welled in her eyes as she carefully pulled it from the box, running her fingers over the fabric, taking in the memories it held. This was something Dylan had cherished, something he had carried with him everywhere. Evelyn felt a sharp pang of grief. It wasn't just a bag. It was a connection to him, to the life they had shared, to everything she had lost. She opened it carefully, her heart racing as she reached inside. There, tucked away in the small inner pocket, was a folded letter, its edges frayed with time. Her breath caught in her throat as she pulled it out. She recognized Dylan's handwriting immediately. Her hands trembling, Evelyn unfolded the paper. The letter was short, but the words were clear, and they hit her harder than anything had since his death. "To my dearest Evelyn," it began, the familiar loops of Dylan's handwriting grounding her in the moment. "I don't know if you'll ever find this, but if you do, know that I loved you, always. I've kept this bag with me because it holds so many memories, so many things that remind me of us. Please take care of it, just like I took care of you. I hope you find peace, and I hope this will bring you comfort when you need it most." Evelyn closed her eyes, clutching the letter to her chest, feeling as though the weight of it would crush her. This was Dylan's final message, his last token of love, hidden away for her to find when she needed it most. The tears she had been holding back flowed freely now, as she realized just how much Dylan had cared for her. He had never intended for her to face this alone. He had always believed in her strength, and even in his absence, he had left something for her to hold on to. She wiped her eyes, her breath ragged as she stood up, her hand still gripping the letter tightly. She took one last look around the room, at the boxes filled with their shared memories. She had thought she would be able to leave this place without looking back, but now it felt impossible. There was too much history here, too many moments of love and joy that Austin had never understood, let alone appreciated. Austin's voice broke through her thoughts. "Are you done yet? I need to get back to work." Evelyn turned to face him, her eyes clear now, her resolve hardening with each passing second. "I'm done," she said, her voice low but unwavering. "But I'll never be done with what you've done to me, Austin." His face darkened, but Evelyn didn't care. The weight of his dismissal, his coldness, it no longer mattered. She had found her strength in the smallest of things. Dylan's love, his foresight, his belief in her, that was all she needed. Evelyn reached for the messenger bag, slinging it over her shoulder with a quiet sense of finality. "I'm leaving now," she said, her voice firm. "I'm done here." Austin's eyes followed her, cold and calculating. "You'll regret this, Mom. You're making a mistake." Evelyn shook her head, walking toward the door without another word. She didn't need to listen to his manipulations anymore. This was her life, and she was reclaiming it, one step at a time. As she stepped out into the hallway, the door shutting quietly behind her, she felt something shift inside her. The conflict with Austin wasn't over, not by a long shot, but Evelyn had made up her mind. She was moving forward, not as his mother, but as herself. And for the first time in years, Evelyn Turner felt free. Evelyn drove away from the penthouse, the familiar streets slipping by unnoticed as her mind replayed the confrontation with Austin. She could still hear his voice in her head, cold and dismissive, but there was something else now, something that made her heart ache more than the cruel words he had spoken. It wasn't just that he had pushed her away or that he had disregarded everything she had once meant to him. It was the growing realization that Austin had never really known her, never truly seen her for who she was, until now. The world outside was silent, but Evelyn's thoughts were loud. She had made the decision to leave, to reclaim her life, but Austin had only begun to feel the weight of what he had done. She had seen the hardened walls he had built around himself, walls that had started to crack. Back at the penthouse, Austin stood by the window, staring out at the city, his mind spinning. The harshness of the words he had said to his mother echoed in his ears, like an unrelenting drumbeat. He had always been proud of his control, of the power he had over situations, over people, but now, standing in the very home that had once been his family's, he felt a sharp pang of regret, a feeling so foreign to him that it made his chest tighten with unease. He had pushed his mother away with such cold indifference, but the truth was, the penthouse didn't feel like home anymore. It hadn't for a long time. The spaces where he had grown up, the places that had once held warmth and familiarity, now felt hollow. His father's death had forced him to confront a reality he had been trying to ignore, and Evelyn's departure, her quiet resolve to leave him behind, had shaken him to his core. He walked aimlessly around the apartment, his mind reeling. The design, the renovations, the decisions, all the things that had once consumed him were now meaningless. The coldness of the marble floors beneath his feet matched the emptiness he felt inside. His thoughts turned to his mother, to the way she had looked at him with a sadness that pierced him deeper than any harsh words ever could. He sank down onto the sofa, the room spinning as the weight of everything he had said and done settled in. The luxury of the penthouse, the investments, the cars, it all seemed so shallow now, so insignificant compared to the loss of the woman who had always been there for him, no matter what. And yet, in his own ambition, in his need for control, he had pushed her away, just as Dylan had feared he would. His phone buzzed in his pocket, but Austin didn't reach for it. Instead, he sat there, the silence suffocating. It wasn't until the doorbell rang that he snapped back to reality, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew who it was. Tessa Stone, his assistant, had arrived to check on the latest financial matters. Austin stood up quickly, wiping his face with the back of his hand, trying to pull himself together. He wasn't going to break down in front of her. He wouldn't let anyone see his vulnerability. He opened the door to find Tessa standing there, her usual brisk professionalism in place, but her eyes softened when she saw his face. "Mr. Turner," she said, her voice laced with concern. "Is everything all right? I heard you and your mother had some difficulties earlier." Austin swallowed hard, trying to keep his composure. He hadn't expected anyone to notice, but it seemed the cracks in his emotional armor were becoming harder to hide. "I'm fine," he said quickly, but there was no conviction in his voice. "Just a lot going on. How are the reports coming along?" Tessa stepped inside, placing the folder on the coffee table in front of him, but her gaze didn't leave his face. "Austin, I know you're going through a lot right now, but you need to face what's happened with your mother. You can't keep pushing her away like this. The things you said?" She trailed off, but the words were clear. Austin closed his eyes, his throat tightening. He couldn't deny the truth of her words. He had been so focused on the penthouse, the investments, the image he was trying to maintain, that he had forgotten the one person who had always been there for him. And now, it was too late. "I didn't mean it," he muttered, his voice cracking. "I didn't mean any of it. I was just angry at everything. At Dad, at the business, at her, but I never meant to hurt her." His words came out in a rush, a confession he had never thought he would make. Tessa stood quietly, letting him speak. She had known Austin long enough to understand that he rarely showed this kind of vulnerability. His cold exterior had always been his defense, the wall he had built to protect himself from the world. But now, that wall was crumbling, and he was left facing the wreckage of his own actions. "I can't fix it," Austin whispered, his voice raw with emotion. "I've pushed her too far. She'll never forgive me." Tessa's expression softened further, and she placed a hand on his shoulder, the gesture surprisingly tender. "You can try, Austin, but you need to start by facing what you've done. You can't keep running from this." Austin nodded slowly, the weight of her words sinking in. He had been running for so long, chasing after success, after power, after things that no longer mattered. And now, with his mother gone, with the penthouse crumbling around him, he was finally realizing that none of it was worth the price he had paid. As Tessa left, Austin sat alone in the empty penthouse, his mind racing with the truth of what he had done. He had to make things right with his mother, had to find a way to make amends for the cruelty he had shown her. But deep down, he knew it might be too late. Back in Carmel, Evelyn Turner had made her decision. She had reclaimed her life, her independence, and she would not let Austin, nor anyone else, control her. She would not bend to his demands, not after everything he had said and done. Her resolve was clear. She would face him once again, but not as the woman he had cast aside. She would face him as the woman who had been wronged, the woman who had a future of her own, a future that Dylan had carefully crafted for her. And as Austin sat in the empty penthouse, haunted by his mistakes, he realized something. The one person he had always taken for granted was the one person he now needed the most. But would it be too late to fix what he had broken? The question lingered in the air, unanswered, as Evelyn Turner prepared to move forward with her life on her own terms. Evelyn stood in the garden of the Carmel cottage, her fingers lightly brushing the cool surface of the stone fence that bordered the lush greenery. It had been days since the conversation with Austin, days since she had resolved to confront him. The wind had picked up, gently rustling the leaves above her, and she found herself caught between the peace of her new life and the unresolved tension still lingering between her and her son. The phone buzzed in her hand, pulling her from her thoughts. It was Austin's name on the screen. Her heart fluttered unexpectedly. Despite everything, despite the cruelty, the dismissal, and the words that had cut her so deeply, she knew this call was inevitable. Austin had reached out again. It was time. Taking a deep breath, Evelyn swiped to answer, her voice calm yet firm. "Austin." "Mom," came his voice, weary but unmistakably different from the coldness of their last conversation. There was a hesitation, a small crack in his usual control. I need to talk about everything. Evelyn paused for a moment, feeling the weight of the years of silence and frustration that had accumulated between them. She had spent so long believing that their relationship would never recover. But something in his tone made her wonder if maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something new. I'm listening, she replied softly, her voice steady despite the uncertainty she felt. I know I've messed up. I know I've hurt you, Austin said, his voice quieter now. And I'm sorry. I don't even know how to fix it. But I don't know what else to do. You're the only one left who can help me. Evelyn closed her eyes, letting the silence fill the space between them. She had been expecting something like this, a plea, an admission of guilt. But was she ready to help him? Could she truly forgive him after everything he had done? After how he had abandoned her, ignored her needs, and thrown her out without a second thought? Her thoughts wandered back to the letter Dylan had left her, to the carefully planned life he had orchestrated for her, one that she would live on her terms without dependency. But was she ready to extend that same generosity to her son, the one who had caused her so much pain? Help you with what, Austin? Evelyn asked, her voice firm but not unkind. I can't keep giving in to your demands. Not after everything you've said. But if you truly want my help, you'll have to do more than ask for money. You need to show me that you understand what you've done and that you're willing to change. There was a long pause on the line, and Evelyn could almost hear Austin's internal struggle. She had never seen him like this before, so vulnerable, so aware of his own flaws. Perhaps after all this time, he was beginning to see the truth of what Dylan had feared all along. I get it, Austin finally said, his voice quieter. I've been reckless. I've spent money like it was nothing, thrown away relationships, and taken people for granted. But I don't know how to fix it all, Mom. I'm just stuck. I'm about to lose everything, and I don't know where else to turn. Evelyn felt the familiar pang of sympathy mixed with the bitter sting of resentment. She had always been there for Austin, even when he had shut her out. But could she continue to support him when he hadn't yet shown that he was willing to take responsibility for his actions? I can't just bail you out, Austin, she said, her voice hardening slightly. You need to understand that you can't continue living this way, relying on others to fix your mistakes. If you want my help, you'll have to earn it, and it won't be easy. There was a tremor of understanding in Austin's voice now, a recognition of just how much his mother had been pushed to the brink. I understand. I'll do whatever it takes, Mom, please. I just need a chance. I'll work for it. I won't ask for more than what's fair. Evelyn listened, her heart heavy as the conversation continued. His words weren't empty. She could hear the sincerity in his voice, the rawness of his vulnerability. But was it enough? I'll help you, she said at last, her voice quiet but resolute. But not without conditions. I'm not going to give you a free pass, Austin. You'll need to show me that you've changed. I'll help you manage your finances, but you'll have to take responsibility for your debts. And I'll hold you accountable for how you treat people from now on. There was a long pause, and for a moment, Evelyn thought Austin might push back. But then, softly he spoke. I'm willing to do that. I'll start with whatever you think is best. I just need to prove that I can do better. Evelyn's chest tightened as she processed his words. He was asking for a second chance. But it wasn't just about the money, was it? It wasn't just about fixing his financial mess. Austin had always been so focused on appearances, on building his empire. But this time, it wasn't just about the outward success. It was about him facing the person he had become and confronting the consequences of his actions. You'll need to go through therapy, Evelyn said slowly, the words coming out with a certainty she hadn't expected. Not just to fix your finances, but to fix yourself. You need to understand why you treat people the way you do, why you've pushed everyone away. Money doesn't fix that, Austin. You have to fix that. There was a silence on the line, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable. It was thoughtful. I'll do it, Austin said finally, his voice quieter now. I know I need to. I'm sorry, Mom. I've been a terrible son. I didn't know how much you mattered to me until it was almost too late. Evelyn's heart ached as she heard the rawness in his admission. It wasn't the perfect apology, but it was the beginning of something. a small hesitant step toward understanding, toward healing. "I'll help you," she said again, her voice gentler now. "But this is the last chance, Austin. Don't make me regret it." "I won't," he said, a note of sincerity in his voice. "I promise." Evelyn hung up the phone, her mind swirling with the weight of what had just transpired. She had agreed to help him, but not out of obligation. She had agreed because, somewhere deep inside, she could see the small glimmer of change in Austin, a recognition of his own weaknesses, a willingness to confront them. It was a far cry from the man who had dismissed her, thrown her out, and belittled her only weeks ago, but there was still so much more to be done. Evelyn stood up from the chair, her fingers still resting on the phone as the reality of what lay ahead began to settle in. Austin's path to redemption would be long, but she had drawn a line in the sand. It was up to him to cross it, and as for Evelyn, she knew that her own journey was just beginning. She was no longer just his mother. She was a woman with boundaries, with strength, and with a future of her own. No longer would she let Austin or anyone define her. The decision had been made. The path forward was clear. Austin Turner stared at the pile of overdue invoices and balance sheets strewn across his desk, the weight of the financial mess he had created pressing down on him like a physical force. The penthouse renovations, which had once seemed like the key to his future success, were now spiraling out of control. What had started as a minor upgrade to improve the property's value had turned into an overwhelming series of unforeseen costs. The building, with its age-old pipes and crumbling foundation, had fought back against every attempt at improvement. The contractors had begun pulling out, citing non-payment for the last few months. The work had ground to a halt, and now, with the penthouse in disarray, Austin was facing the real possibility of losing everything. He sat back in his chair, running a hand through his disheveled hair, his mind racing with thoughts of failure. He had been so sure of himself, so confident that his aggressive investment strategies would pay off. But now, every gamble he had made seemed to backfire. His most recent investment, the one he had thrown the majority of his capital into, had collapsed entirely. The development project in the up-and-coming neighborhood had fallen apart when environmental review found contamination that wasn't disclosed in the initial site assessment. The investors had pulled out, and Austin was left holding the bag. The weight of the situation was unbearable. The debts were piling up. The penthouse was a sinking ship, and his failed investments had drained what little liquid assets he had left. The business was in shambles. His reputation was crumbling. And the worst part? He was standing on the edge of losing his inheritance, the one thing he had thought would guarantee his future. His phone buzzed on the desk, and for a moment he thought about ignoring it. But then he saw the name on the screen, Mom, Evelyn. He had avoided her for weeks after their last confrontation. But now, with no other options, he knew he had no choice but to swallow his pride and ask for help. Taking a deep breath, he answered the call, trying to mask the desperation in his voice. "Mom," Evelyn's voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. "Austin, I wasn't expecting to hear from you." "I know," he muttered, the words almost painful to say. I need to talk about everything." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Evelyn didn't respond immediately, and Austin could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. His mind was racing. How was he going to explain everything? How could he possibly make her understand the mess he had created? And, more importantly, how could he convince her to help him? "Mom, I don't know where else to turn. The renovations on the penthouse are, well, they're falling apart. The contractors have pulled out, and I can't afford to finish the work. The building's falling apart. The last investment I made failed. I put everything I had into it, and now I'm stuck. I don't know what to do anymore." Evelyn's voice came through, steady, but with an underlying hint of concern. "Austin, you're going to have to explain more than that. What exactly happened with the penthouse and the investments?" Austin squeezed his eyes shut, trying to gather his thoughts. The penthouse, his legacy, had been his grand project. It had been supposed to secure his future, but now it was a symbol of his failure. The renovations had spiraled out of control. The costs had more than doubled, and he hadn't been able to keep up with payments. Contractors had started pulling out, leaving unfinished work all over the building. To make matters worse, his other investments had faltered. He had gambled big on a development project, hoping to turn a quick profit. Instead, the project had collapsed when environmental issues were discovered, and all his money had vanished along with it. "I'm deep in debt, Mom," Austin said, his voice raw. "I don't know how much longer I can keep up with the payments. The penthouse, what was supposed to be my future, is now a liability, and the loans are stacking up. I'm going to lose everything." Evelyn's silence was deafening. Austin could feel the weight of her scrutiny through the phone. She had always been the one to give him the benefit of the doubt, always the one to encourage him when he needed it. But now, he wasn't sure how she would react. She had already seen the way he had treated her, the way he had dismissed her when she needed support. But now he had no other options, no other place to turn. "I don't want to lose everything, Mom," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Please, I need your help." Evelyn's voice was soft but firm when she finally responded. "Austin, I'm not going to bail you out. You've made your choices, and now you have to live with the consequences." Austin's heart sank at her words. But he wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. Not after everything. "I know, Mom. I've made mistakes. But I can't do this alone anymore. I'm asking for a chance, just a chance to fix it. I'll do whatever it takes." There was a long pause, and Austin could hear Evelyn taking a deep breath on the other end of the line. When she spoke again, her voice was measured, careful. "I'm not going to give you a free pass, Austin. You're going to have to earn my help, but I'll help you on one condition." Austin's pulse quickened. "Anything, Mom. Just tell me what I need to do. I'll help you manage your debts, but you need to show me that you're willing to take responsibility for your actions," Evelyn said. "You'll need to go through financial counseling, and you'll need to prove to me that you understand the consequences of your decisions. No more running from it. No more avoiding responsibility." Austin closed his eyes, relief flooding through him at her words. But there was a weight to them, too. It wasn't just about the money. It was about him taking responsibility for his actions, about changing his behavior, and that would be harder than any of the financial problems he was facing. "Thank you, Mom," Austin said, his voice shaking with a mix of gratitude and fear. "I'll do whatever it takes." Evelyn's voice softened, but it was still firm. "This is your last chance, Austin. I'm doing this because I believe you can do better. But this time, you're going to have to prove it. I won't help you if you're not willing to face the truth about what you've done." Austin swallowed hard, the weight of her words settling in. He had no more room to run, no more excuses. This was it. "I will," he said, his voice steady now. "I'll prove it to you." As the call ended, Austin sat back in his chair, the enormity of what he had just agreed to sinking in. It wasn't just about the money or the penthouse anymore. It was about him facing everything he had been avoiding, his failures, his mistakes, and the man he had become. But for the first time in a long time, he felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he could fix it, and with Evelyn's help, though hard-earned, he would begin to rebuild. The air outside the Carmel cottage had taken on the chill of an early autumn evening, and Evelyn Turner stood by the window, watching the sun dip below the horizon. She had just finished a quiet cup of tea, the rhythm of her life in Carmel now feeling more like a steady beat than the chaotic rhythm she had once known. Still, there was no escaping the weight of the situation with Austin. No matter how many mornings she spent walking along the beach or tending to the garden, the reality of what had happened still lingered in the back of her mind. Her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, and Evelyn stepped toward it, her fingers already knowing who was on the other end. The name on the screen confirmed her suspicions. Tessa Stone, Austin's assistant. She had expected this. After all, Austin had made it clear that he needed help, and he wasn't about to approach her directly again. Instead, he sent Tessa, the middlewoman, the one who could deliver the message without the emotional weight of his own guilt or frustration. Evelyn answered the phone, her voice calm, but resolute. "Tessa." "Mrs. Turner," Tessa replied, her tone professional but tinged with an underlying tension. "I'm here to speak with you about Mr. Turner's current situation. I'm sorry to call on such short notice, but it's quite urgent." Evelyn's brows furrowed, but she kept her voice steady. "I'll be expecting you then, Tessa. I'll be here." The line went dead, and Evelyn set the phone back down, her mind already working through the possibilities of what was to come. She had been prepared for Austin's desperation, but hearing it through Tessa's voice felt different, more formal, more detached. She didn't feel the same rawness that had come through during their last conversation. This was business, and Evelyn would treat it as such. She had drawn her lines, and she wasn't about to let anyone, not even her son's assistant, blur them. 15 minutes later, there was a knock at the door. Evelyn took a steadying breath and moved to open it. Standing there, with her arms stiffly folded, was Tessa Stone. Dressed in a sharp black suit, her makeup impeccable, Tessa exuded the quiet professionalism of someone used to handling business. Yet there was something else in her eyes, a flicker of discomfort, of unease, as if she too knew that what she was about to say would not be easy to deliver. "Mrs. Turner," Tessa said with a strained smile, stepping inside as Evelyn stepped back to let her enter. "Thank you for seeing me." Evelyn nodded, her gaze cool and composed. "Of course. Please sit down. Would you like tea?" Tessa hesitated for only a moment before taking a seat at the small table. "I'm fine, thank you." Her eyes darted briefly around the room, as if the calm serenity of the cottage was a stark contrast to the tension she was carrying with her. Evelyn didn't waste any time. "What's the situation, Tessa?" she asked, her voice steady. She already knew what was coming. The same financial mess Austin had found himself in was now spilling over into her space. She had seen it in his eyes during their last conversation, the fear, the desperation, and she knew that eventually Tessa would be the one to bring it to her. Tessa cleared her throat, looking down at the papers she had placed neatly on the table in front of her. She fidgeted with them, seemingly reluctant to speak the words out loud. "Mr. Turner is in significant financial trouble," she began. "The penthouse renovations are over budget, and he's been unable to secure additional funding. There are outstanding debts, and he's facing foreclosure if the situation isn't resolved soon. He's asking for your help, Mrs. Turner. He can't make the payments on his own, and he's afraid he'll lose everything." Evelyn didn't flinch. She didn't move an inch. She knew this was coming. The sob story, the appeal for sympathy dressed up in legal jargon. What she didn't know, however, was how Tessa, someone who had witnessed Austin's every move, his every decision, would react in this moment. Would she simply be the messenger, or was there more behind the request? "And what exactly is he asking for, Tessa?" Evelyn asked, her tone soft but firm. "He wants me to pay off his debts, doesn't he?" Tessa shifted in her seat, avoiding Evelyn's gaze for a moment before she spoke. "Yes, he's asking for you to help cover the costs. The penthouse renovations, the debts. He doesn't have enough liquid assets to cover the losses. He's hoping you'll step in, just for the time being. Help him get back on his feet." Evelyn felt her jaw tighten. She had been prepared for this, but hearing it spoken aloud brought back memories of the man who had once been her son, the man who had turned his back on her when she needed him most. The man who had belittled her, cast her aside, and now had the gall to ask for help, expecting her to simply sweep in and fix his mess. "No," Evelyn said quietly, but with finality, her eyes never leaving Tessa's. "I will not bail him out. Not like this." Tessa's eyebrows knitted together in confusion. "But Mrs. Turner, if you don't help, he's going to lose everything. The penthouse, his investments, everything." "I understand," Evelyn replied, her voice calm but resolute. "But Austin needs to face the consequences of his actions. He has made decisions that have put him in this position. I'm not going to step in and fix them. Not now. Not when he's refused to take responsibility for his behavior." Tessa opened her mouth to protest, but Evelyn held up a hand, silencing her. "You can tell Austin this," Evelyn continued, her voice now cold. "I will not give him a free pass. If he wants my help, he will have to do the work himself. He needs to face his financial situation head-on. He needs to understand the value of hard work, responsibility, and accountability. And I will not offer a penny unless he goes through financial counseling and proves to me that he is willing to change." Tessa seemed taken aback. She had likely expected Evelyn to cave, to soften, but Evelyn stood firm, her decision made. Tessa, for all her business acumen, was not prepared for this kind of response. "You're not going to help him?" Tessa asked, disbelief in her voice. "You'll let him lose everything?" "I'm not going to let him lose everything, Tessa," Evelyn replied sharply. "But I am going to make sure that he understands the value of what he has and the consequences of what he's done. This is the only way forward." Tessa was silent for a moment, her lips pressed tight. Finally, she stood up, gathering the papers on the table. "I'll pass this on to him. I didn't expect you to be so firm." Evelyn met her gaze. "I've learned the hard way that sometimes we have to make the tough decisions. Austin has made his choices. Now he has to make things right." Tessa gave a stiff nod, her expression thoughtful, but Evelyn could see the trace of respect in her eyes. As she left the cottage, Evelyn closed the door behind her, her mind already turning to the future. The time for leniency had passed. She had done what she could for Austin in the past, but now it was his turn to prove that he was worthy of her help. And Evelyn Turner wasn't about to let anyone, least of all her son, push her into a decision she wasn't ready to make. Not anymore. As the door clicked shut, she exhaled deeply, her resolve hardening with each passing moment. The battle with Austin was far from over, but Evelyn knew one thing for certain. She would no longer be the one to sacrifice her peace for his mistakes. Evelyn Turner stood at the window of her cozy study in the Carmel cottage, watching as the morning fog lifted from the ocean. The sunlight filtered through the trees, casting long shadows on the stone pathway outside. It had been a peaceful morning, just the kind of tranquility she had come to treasure since moving to the coast. But today was different. Today, Austin was coming. The phone call had been short but clear. Austin had requested to meet in person, to discuss the future, to talk through the mess he had created. Evelyn had agreed. She had been preparing herself for this moment ever since their last conversation. The sting of his earlier treatment still lingered, but so did the faint flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for something to change. The doorbell rang, and Evelyn's heart fluttered despite herself. She took a moment to steady her breath before opening the door. Standing before her was Austin, looking more disheveled than usual, his suit slightly wrinkled, his hands shoved in his pockets. The usual air of superiority he carried seemed to have dissipated, replaced by something raw, something vulnerable. "Mom," Austin said, his voice quiet, almost tentative. "Can we talk?" Evelyn stepped aside to let him in, her eyes searching his face for any signs of what was to come. She had no illusions about Austin. His pride and arrogance had often masked his deeper insecurities, but something was different today. She wasn't sure if it was genuine regret or just desperation, but she was willing to listen. "I'm glad you came," Evelyn said calmly, leading him into the living room. She motioned toward the armchair by the fireplace, her own posture relaxed but firm. "Please sit." Austin hesitated for a moment before lowering himself into the chair, his gaze focused on the floor, as if the weight of the conversation already bore down on him. Evelyn took a seat opposite him, her hands folded in her lap, her posture open but not passive. This was her space now, her sanctuary, and she would not let him disrupt it, not without taking responsibility for his actions. The silence between them stretched for a few moments, awkward and thick with unspoken words. Evelyn had always been a patient listener, but this was different. The distance between them had never felt so vast. Finally, Austin spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I messed up, Mom. I know I've hurt you. And I know I've pushed you away for all the wrong reasons." Evelyn studied him closely. She could see the tension in his shoulders, the tightness in his jaw, as if he were forcing himself to speak the words he had so long avoided. There was no denying the vulnerability in his voice, something raw and real that Evelyn hadn't heard from him in years. "I don't even know where to start," Austin continued, his hands rubbing together nervously. "I thought I could handle everything, thought I could fix it all on my own, but I couldn't. I should have come to you sooner. I should have realized how much you meant to me, how much you've always been there for me, even when I didn't deserve it." Evelyn remained silent, letting him speak, but she couldn't help the twinge of disappointment that curled inside her. It was hard not to feel the weight of all the years when Austin had only seen her as someone to be managed, not as a person with her own needs, desires, and worth. But she wasn't going to let him off the hook just because he was finally showing some remorse. "You're right," she said, her voice steady but filled with a quiet strength. "You should have come to me sooner. You should have seen how your actions were affecting me and everyone else around you, but you didn't. And now we're left picking up the pieces." Austin's gaze snapped to hers, a flicker of something like guilt passing through his eyes. I know, and I regret it. I regret the way I treated you, the way I pushed you away. It wasn't just the money. It wasn't just the penthouse or the investments. It was everything. The way I've ignored you, the way I've taken you for granted. And I'm sorry. I never realized how much that would hurt you. I was so focused on what I wanted, on proving myself, that I didn't see how much I was losing. Evelyn's chest tightened, but she held her ground. This was the moment of reckoning. The moment when Austin had to prove that his words meant something, that his apology wasn't just an attempt to avoid consequences, but a genuine admission of his failures. "You've hurt me?" "Austin," Evelyn said, her voice quiet but firm. "Not just with your words, but with your actions. You've spent years making decisions that impacted us all, but you've only ever looked out for yourself. And when I needed you, when I thought you would be there for me, you turned your back on me." She let the silence settle, giving him time to absorb the gravity of what she had said. It wasn't about his money, not anymore. It was about the emotional distance that had grown between them, the years of neglect, and the final betrayal when he had dismissed her as if she were nothing more than an inconvenience. But something had shifted in Austin's eyes. Something deeper than the apology, deeper than his earlier defensiveness. "I understand," he said, his voice steady now, less defensive. "I've been selfish. I've been so wrapped up in what I thought I deserved that I never stopped to think about what I was doing to you. I've treated you like you didn't matter, and I can't take that back. But I want to change. I know I can't undo what I've done, but I'm ready to start making things right. With you. With everything." Evelyn felt a tightness in her chest loosen, but she didn't let her guard down just yet. She had made her decision, and Austin would need to prove that he was committed to change. Not just to getting out of his financial mess. "I'm willing to help you." "Austin," she said slowly, her voice filled with the weight of her words. "But not without boundaries. I will not bail you out of your mistakes. I'm not going to let you use me to fix everything for you. You need to do the hard work. You need to show me that you're willing to be accountable, not just financially, but emotionally. You need to understand the damage you've caused. And you need to take responsibility for it." Austin's face softened, and for the first time in a long while, Evelyn saw something resembling the man he had once been, the compassionate son she had raised. "I will, I promise," he said, his voice low and sincere. "I'll do whatever it takes. I'll go through the counseling. I'll fix the financial mess. I won't make excuses anymore." Evelyn nodded, her expression resolute. "This isn't just about money, Austin. It's about you changing the way you see the world, changing the way you treat people. And that's going to take time. But I'll help you, on one condition." Austin leaned forward slightly, his attention fixed on her. "What's that?" "You have to prove to me that you're committed to this. To us, no more empty promises. I'm not going to carry you anymore. You'll need to take the lead on this, and I'll support you. But I won't do it for you." For a moment, Austin was silent. Then, with a deep breath, he nodded, his eyes meeting hers with something that had been missing for so long. "Trust. I'll prove it to you." "Mom, I won't let you down again." As Evelyn looked at him, she realized that this was the first real step towards reconciliation they had taken in years. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't happen overnight. But for the first time in a long time, she felt like they were on the same path, one where they could finally face the future together. The road ahead was uncertain. But Evelyn knew one thing for sure. She had finally taken control of her life, and this, too, was part of her journey. A new beginning, not just for her, but for Austin as well. And as the sun set over the ocean, Evelyn felt a glimmer of hope. The early morning light broke over the Pacific, casting a warm glow on the garden surrounding the Carmel cottage. Evelyn Turner stood near the rose bushes, her hands resting on the wooden fence that bordered the small path, watching as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and pink. The air was crisp, carrying with it the familiar scent of the ocean mixed with the earthy fragrance of the flowers in bloom. This was the life Dylan had prepared for her, a life of peace, solitude, and a deep sense of security. As she looked out over the garden, Evelyn thought back to the whirlwind of the past year. It had been a year of unexpected twists, of painful realizations and difficult decisions, but also of growth, both for her and for Austin. The man who had once pushed her away, the son who had thought he could control everything, was now working hard to change. And she was beginning to believe that change was possible. Austin had come a long way since their confrontation in the penthouse. The road had been rough, and there had been moments of doubt, moments when it seemed like he might revert to old habits. But he hadn't. He had kept his word, attending therapy, working with financial advisors, and making real progress in confronting his emotional and financial missteps. With Evelyn's guidance, he was learning to rebuild not just his finances, but his relationship with her and with himself. The weekly meetings had become routine now, the financial plans more stable, and the emotional walls between them gradually lowering. Evelyn had insisted on keeping her boundaries clear, no more enabling, no more rescuing. But she had also offered him the tools to heal, showing him, in her own quiet way, that redemption wasn't just about the money. It was about understanding, vulnerability, and the courage to make different choices. Evelyn felt a small smile tug at her lips as she thought about the change in him. He still had a long way to go, but the shift in Austin was undeniable. The compassion she had longed for from him had started to surface, and while it wasn't perfect, it was real. And that, she thought, was enough. As she turned back toward the house, Evelyn caught a glimpse of the cottage's small study, where she had spent so many hours over the past few months, reviewing Dylan's carefully constructed estate plan. His foresight had allowed her to live without fear, something she hadn't realized she needed until after his passing. His plan had not only provided for her financially, but had also given her the clarity she needed to move forward. Dylan had known that she would need more than just material wealth to rebuild her life. He had given her the tools to feel secure in herself, in her own strength, and in the choices she made. It was a bittersweet realization, the depth of Dylan's love for her, his final act of protection. She had spent so many years wrapped in the comfort of their shared life, never suspecting that Dylan had been preparing for a future without him. His love, his careful planning, had been his final gift to her, a legacy that allowed her to rebuild, not just her finances but her sense of self-worth. Evelyn walked back inside, her eyes briefly flicking over the small stack of letters and paperwork on the table. The estate was in order, the assets managed, and the financial advisors had confirmed that she was in a strong position for the future. There was nothing left to worry about now except for the few personal decisions she had yet to make. But today, Evelyn allowed herself a moment of peace. She had learned to trust herself again, to honor the quiet strength that had always been inside her. She had faced her fears, confronted her past, and now, with the security that Dylan's plan had provided, she felt ready to embrace the future. Sitting down at the table, she noticed a framed photo of her and Dylan on their 35th anniversary in Venice, laughing, carefree, and full of life. It was the image of a love that had shaped everything she had known. And now, it was the image of a love that had transcended even death. A love that had left her with everything she needed to carry on. Evelyn placed her hands on the table, her fingers brushing the edges of the photo, and she closed her eyes for a moment, breathing in the stillness. The healing had come slowly, but it had come. And with it, the understanding that Dylan's final gift had not just been about wealth or property. It had been about the future, her future. Outside, the sun was climbing higher in the sky, the light warming the earth and filling the garden with color. Evelyn stood, walking to the door and stepping into the garden once again. The roses she had planted were blooming in brilliant colors, their petals opening to the sun. She ran her hand over the leaves, taking in the delicate beauty of the moment. This, she realized, was what Dylan had wanted for her. Not just a life of comfort, but a life of peace, a life where she could bloom, where she could find joy in the small things, where she could grow without fear of what was ahead. She looked out at the ocean, its waves crashing gently against the shore, and felt the weight of the past years settle into something lighter. The future was no longer a daunting unknown. It was a place where she could finally stand on her own, where she could honor Dylan's legacy by living the life he had intended for her. Austin would continue his journey. There would be challenges ahead, no doubt, but for the first time in a long while, Evelyn felt hopeful about the possibilities. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing in the crisp morning air, and when she opened them again, she smiled, truly at peace. The garden was full of life, and so was she. It was a new beginning, one that Dylan had ensured she would have, and for the first time in a long while, Evelyn Turner felt the warmth of the sun on her face and the quiet confidence that no matter what came next, she was ready to face it.